At the Washington Post, where democracy dies in bloviating pomposity, opinion columnist Elizabeth Bruenig has written an op-ed headlined, "It's Time to Reclaim Socialism from the Dirty Word Category." By the way, here's a fun little quiz. Try to figure out, just from that headline, whether Elizabeth Bruenig is A, another one of these vaguely cute millennial babes without the brains God gave a goose, or B, something else. Anyway, the cute goose-brained millennial babe says, quote, and this is a real quote, "Socialism has meant different things to different people in different times and places," unquote. And this is undoubtedly true. For instance, there's the Soviet socialism that caused the Ukrainian famine of the 1930s, leading to the deaths of millions of Ukrainians. But there's also the Chinese socialism that led to the famine of 1959, leading to the deaths of tens of millions of Chinese. There's the wonderful socialism of Europe that provided universal 19th century healthcare while gutting the most vibrant culture the world has ever seen until it's now a listless hulk of a wimpocracy that stands and stares gormlessly while invading hordes of medieval crazy men rape their children uninterrupted. But of course, there's also the almost perfect socialism of Scandinavia, where about 90% of the wealth is in private hands, so it's not socialism, which works great. And we should never forget the socialism of Cuba and Venezuela, which has taken countries overflowing with natural resources and turned them into smoking relics full of hunger, deprivation, and violence. But that's only because they didn't do the socialism right, and therefore it turned out like all the other places where they had socialism and didn't do it right, which is all the other places where they had socialism. But Elizabeth Bruenig and other airheaded millennial babes are right. All of that is no reason to make socialism a dirty word. The fact that socialism deprives you of your freedom by depriving you of the right to use your property as you see fit, now that's a good reason. Trigger warning, I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is The Andrew Klavan Show.
I feel hunky-dunky, life is tickety-boo. Birds are winging, also singing hunky-dunky-doo. Ship-shaped, ipsy-topsy, the world is zippity-zing. It's a wonderful day, hurrah, hooray! It makes me want to sing. Oh, hurrah, hooray! Oh, hooray, hurrah!
All right, hooray, hurrah. We've got Joy Villa with us today, which was great. And the mailbag is tomorrow. I have to go through this so you remember. Hit the go on thedailywire.com, subscribe, lousy $10, $100, you get the whole year. All your problems will be solved in the mailbag, so it's worth every penny of it. Hit the podcast button, hit the Andrew Klavan podcast button, hit the little mailbag picture, and ask me anything you want. Personal problems, religious ideas, political ideas. Ask me anything you want, and my answers are guaranteed 100% correct and will change your life. For the better, I don't know. But also we have the new Lefties Dictionary entry today. But first, we have to talk about your teeth. The important thing about your teeth is not only do you want them to look good, you want them to look good while you're brushing them. You want your toothbrush to look good, and you got to use an electric toothbrush. Electric toothbrushes just work better, and Quip is the better electric toothbrush. I love mine. I take it wherever I go. When it comes, it's the new electric toothbrush that packs just the right amount of vibrations into a slimmer design at a fraction of the cost of bulkier traditional electric brushes, those ones that look like bazookas. Quip also comes with a mount that suctions right to your mirror and unsticks to use as a cover for hygienic travel anywhere, whether it's going in your gym bag or carry-on. That's what I love about it, the fact that you can carry it around anywhere you go and still have your electric toothbrush with you. Quip's subscription plan refreshes your brush on a dentist-recommended schedule, delivering new brush heads every 3 months for just $5, including free shipping worldwide. Quip starts at just $25, and if you go to getquip.com/Klavan right now, you'll get your first refill pack free with a Quip electric toothbrush. That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/Klavan, spelled GETQUIP.com. Of course, you can spell that, but how do you spell Klavan? It's KLAVAN. So yesterday, we're talking about what I feel is happening right in front of us, which is the death of feminist culture, the fact that feminism has now devolved into absolute nonsense. I mean, we see that feminism has led all these women into the workplace who are getting treated like pieces of meat. We see feminism is turned into this thing where men get to pretend to be women and then participate in female sports and win everything. I mean, it's just been a degradation of women. I think it is falling apart in front of our eyes. And I think the attack on femininity and masculinity is also starting to backfire. In fact, I have my PragerU feminism video is coming out on Monday. We'll play it here. But I think that, we have to talk about the fact that the tension between manhood and Christian culture is built into our culture. In the old days before Christianity, manhood was pretty simple. You went after the other guy, you took his stuff, you took his women, and you left town. You conquered his land, you raped the women. That was manhood. And if you look at like Homer, the warriors, the men, the admirable heroes, they're just big athletes. That's what they are. I mean, Achilles is kind of a crank, but he is a great warrior and a great killer, and so that's what a man was. And even though, yes, there were all kinds of varieties of men in the classical world, just like there are all kinds of varieties of men today, I'm talking about an image that's in people's minds. And when you had Christianity, which touted sacrifice, which touted martyrdom, which touted humility and being a humble person, that's not really what men are about. Men are not about like, oh yes, peel my skin off and I'll go to heaven. That's great. That's not where men want to be. And that was why the church invented chivalry. Chivalry was basically an invention of the Catholic Church to tame the louts who were knights. The real knights were just louts. They would just go around, they would do the men thing. They would go around raping and pillaging and killing, fighting each other over like 15 feet of ground. And the church said, here's a new version of manhood, as a version of service, a version of standing up for the little guy, a version of sacrifice and chastity. And that's where all the knighthood tales came about. Modernity is basically invented when Shakespeare and Cervantes start to put real people into the chivalric model and show how that leads to tragedy and comedy, right? Don Quixote is ridiculous because he believes in all the noble ideas of chivalry. That's what makes him ridiculous. That's what makes it a comic novel. That's where all the kind of vitality of that novel comes from. Shakespeare does the same thing. Hamlet was a play before Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. Hamlet was a play where a ghost of a dead father comes to Hamlet and says, I was murdered, avenge my death. And Hamlet says, okay, and he does. But Shakespeare puts a real person in there, a modern person, and the ghost says, avenge my death. And Hamlet says, is a ghost real? Do I know the guy's a murderer? Can I kill him when he's praying? He starts to have doubts because he doesn't fit because human beings don't fit into the ideal chivalric model. Macbeth is another example of a tragedy based on that kind of disjunction where Lady Macbeth keeps saying to him, be a man and commit murder. Be a man and do the thing that men do, which is kill your way to the top. And Macbeth is tortured, and they live in this Christian world, so their consciences tear them to shreds because that view of manhood is no longer operational in the Christian world. And today, like the chivalric code is collapsed, and that's what I was talking about yesterday, with it, the only place in TV that you see manhood is in shows like The Sopranos and Breaking Bad, where it's an outlaw thing to be. To be a man is to be an outlaw because the Christian world no longer has a model for manhood. And that's why I pick on superhero movies, because they show a model for manhood that is simply detached from the realities of life. It's detached from death, it's detached from sex, and Marvel tries to make up for that by having them be snarky, but there's no real tragedy in their manhood, which is what part of what Shakespeare and Cervantes were talking about when they invented modernity by putting real people into the chivalric code. Okay, so our job now, I feel, as the feminist model falls apart, the feminist attack on masculinity and femininity falls apart, is we as conservatives have to start to build a new culture of masculinity and femininity. It has to be a modern culture. It's going to have to be based on Christianity as we understand it in the modern world. It's not going to be medieval Christianity. It's not going to be medieval manhood. It's not going to be superhero manhood either, because none of us is really superheroes. We have to invent this new idea. And the thing is, we always hear about the fact that the left owns the culture. And that was true up until about 10 years ago, when people, including me, guys like Andrew Breitbart, went out and started saying, hey, take back the culture. And the tool we used was the internet. And it has been like the first movie in this thing, Culture Wars 1, the Force Awakens, is that what it is? Is that the number one? The Culture Wars 1 was us kind of like the revolutionaries in the Revolutionary War, little guys shooting from behind rocks and trees at this monolith of the movie studios and the television studios, all left wing, the Academy, all left wing, the comics, all left wing, and we started popping up and shooting back. And at the end of Culture War 1, we had kind of got the Death Star on the run. The Death Star of their culture was starting to fall apart. And Donald Trump's victory, in a way, was us kind of coming back and winning, starting to show that people were not entirely buying into the culture of the left. Now, Culture Wars 2, the empire is striking back. They're coming after us, trying to shut us down. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all of them. Twitter's been playing it a little bit cagey, but they're still very left-wing. The thing they did to Dennis Prager, where they took his videos basically and shadow banned them, so suddenly they weren't reaching any of his millions of followers. These videos, the most unhateful. Dennis Prager is one of the most unhateful people you can ever meet. Just as a person, and he would not allow his videos to be hateful. They're not hateful. They're just instructing people on conservative values, and they've reached millions and millions of people. So Facebook takes them down, and then when they get called out on it, because it's really hard to turn Dennis Prager into a bad guy, when they get called out, they say, oh, it's a mistake. So the Babylon Bee, which is rapidly becoming one of the best satire sites, it now is one of the best satire sites on the internet, and it's just gotten better recently. It's kind of detached a little bit from its evangelical moorings and gotten a little bit more political, and they have gotten hilarious. So they have a headline, and here's the picture if you're watching. They have the headline, Dennis Prager. It says, Facebook claims kidnapping Dennis Prager, torturing him in abandoned warehouse was an honest mistake. The thing about this is, it's, when they say, oh, we just made a mistake, what it reminds me of is Mars Attacks. You probably haven't seen it. It's an old movie. It's an old conservative movie making fun of liberals for trying to make friends with the communists. And the communists are represented by Martians who come to Earth to destroy it. And all the intellectuals are saying, but what do they really want? And there's one absolutely hilarious scene, hilarious and kind of a grim, dark way, where the Martians go about killing people with their ray guns, just blowing them to pieces while screaming, we come in peace, we come in peace. And that's what I feel that Facebook is doing when they say, oh no, we're not banning you, we come in peace. They're blowing you up. And I think that we just have to remember that this whole thing is a plan that was put together by George Soros funded Media Matters, run by David Brock. Remember him? David Brock is this Clinton Obama operative who has gone about using the internet to silence and attack conservatives. And a year ago, what was the paper? The Washington Free Beacon got hold of this memo that David Brock put out. And let's just remember who David Brock is. David Brock was the lover of the guy who ran the pizza place in Washington, D.C. that Pizzagate was all about. Remember, the guy went in and shot the place up because he thought there was some kind of weird conspiracy where Hillary Clinton was, what was she doing? Peddling child prostitutes. It was nuts. It was nuts. But Sharyl Attkisson, who wrote the book Smear, has put forward the theory that she can't prove, but it's pretty well supported, that this was all David Brock creating this fake news situation so that he could then go in and attack fake news. And let's not forget, even though Donald Trump has taken over the phrase fake news, this was put forward by the left first. And David Brock had a memo that he sent out where he said, we will fully adapt to the new reality. This is after Trump won, and we will win. In the next 4 years, Media Matters, the Soros-funded company, will continue its core mission of disarming right-wing misinformation while leading the fight against the next generation of conservative disinformation, the proliferation of fake news and propaganda now threatening the country's information ecosystem. Here's what success will look like. Serial misinformers and right-wing propagandists, because there are no left-wing misinformers or propagandists. Serial misinformers and right-wing propagandists inhabiting everything from social media to the highest levels of government will be exposed, discredited. Internet and social media platforms like Google and Facebook will no longer uncritically and without consequence host and enrich fake news sites and propagandists. Toxic alt-right social media fueled harassment campaigns that silence dissent and poison our national discourse will be punished and halted. I'm laughing because who's trying to silence dissent? Brock, Media Matters, George Soros, and they are doing it with the help of the social media corporations, and they're winning. They're actually pulling it off. And this is a plan. They put forward this plan. And now all these social media systems are using people that David Brock installed, like PolitiFact and Snopes, that are left-wing fact checkers, so-called fact checkers, using them to vet their material. And I think that this is they do not want to give up their power that they have had over the culture. And we have got to stay vigilant, and we've got to, Donald Trump is talking about this now, and they're actually suing Facebook over another matter, but I'm sure it has a lot to do with this. And Trump is starting to talk about it. And we all have to talk about it, and we all have to hold them to account because they are basically corporations. As our God King Jeremy Boring was explaining to us, they're acting like publishers, but they're getting the privileges of platforms. As a platform, that's like the phone company, you and I talking, and we can talk. If we want to talk Nazi talk, we can talk Nazi talk. If we want to talk commie talk, we can do that, and they can't stop us on AT&T as long as we're not committing a crime. If you're a publisher, then you are responsible for what people say, and you can be sued. And if I went out and sued every person who has said dishonest things about me, let alone me, if Ben went out and sued every person who said dishonest things about him on Facebook, Facebook would collapse. So they want the privileges of being a platform, but they want the power of being a publisher. They can't have both, and they should be stopped, and they deserve to be stopped. I mean, this is what entrenched power is. The other thing about this is we have also, if we are going to restore the idea of what men and women are, what they really are, not going back into the past, not saying, oh, women have to, do this, this, and this, and can't leave the home and can't vote, although that's not such a bad idea. No, I'm joking. But not restricting people, but just recreating the ideas on which our ideas of ourselves are founded, recreating the culture in which our ideas make sense. If we are going to do that, Christianity also has to be held to account. It also has to be held to account for the ways in which barnacles have accrued on it over the years that we don't need, that are not part of the kingdom of Christ, that are not the things that Jesus was talking about. And that's why I've been hammering the Catholic Church. There was a moment because there's so many people in the Catholic Church who are saying, well, it's in the past. These people raped children in the past. It's all over. It's just, there are no more molesters in the Catholic Church than anywhere else. Which, if you're the body of Christ, is not a good excuse. I'm sorry. There was a moment on Special Report last night that was so powerful and really summed it all up. Because Brett Baer, who is himself a Catholic, had the Bishop of Pittsburgh, which is where a lot of this latest scandal come up, David Zubik. And Baer asks him about this the effect the scandal is having on people who are not going to church because they feel so betrayed. And you can sit there and say, oh, well, they're taking it out on God. Oh, well, they're making the mistake. They didn't rape the kids. They didn't cover it up. Even more importantly, because I know the rapes are horrendous and hideous, and these people should be in prison. And the fact that the time has run out when they can be prosecuted is a crying shame. But the people who covered it up, including the man who is going to answer Brett Baer's question, who's one of the people who covered it up, they're still in place. Not one has been fired. I mean, this is the thing. So what they're talking about when they say, oh, it's in the past, it's not in the past as long as they're still standing there. The cardinal, the guy who was at the center of this investigation, Cardinal Wuerl, is now the cardinal in Washington, D.C. So here's Brett Baer asking this heartfelt question. This is two videos. The first one is Baer asking this question of Bishop David Zubik, and listen to his response.
What do you say to the Catholics who didn't go to church this Sunday because they were so hurt? The Washington Post says clergy's abuse scandals prompt crisis of faith, crisis of confidence. They're just hurt. I talked to them. I mean, I come to you as a newsman, but I'm also a practicing Catholic. And I talked to a lot of people this weekend.
And Brett, how about rage? Because I'm feeling it too. I was ordained a priest 43 years ago, and the collar that I wear is a source of pride for me. And the fact that I know that some of the people who served it with this caller abused people makes me enraged. What I have to say is we need to be able to come closer to God, to first of all, to look at the cross, and that's why I wear this cross on my lapel. First of all, the cross is a sign of why did Jesus get there? It was because of our sins. And looking at the cross, we have to be able to see our own sins in it. But the second thing is the cross is also a sign of where we need to go from here. And I think that for anybody who chose not to come to church this weekend, who somehow is taking this out on God, it's precisely the opposite that we all need. You know, I've prayed more over the course of these last days, and I would encourage other people to do the same.
So this is what he's saying, and the Pope has put out a letter saying, even though it can be said that most of these cases belong to the past, nonetheless, as time goes on, we have come to know the pain of many of the victims. We have realized that these wounds never disappear and that they require us forcefully to condemn these atrocities and join forces in uprooting this culture of death. These wounds never go away. The heart-wrenching pain of these victims, which cries out to heaven, was long ignored, kept quiet, or silenced, but their outcry was more powerful than all the measures meant to silence it or sought even to resolve it by decisions that increased its gravity by falling into complicity. The Lord heard that cry and once again showed us on which side he stands. Now, all right, that's the church speaking. That's the Pope and this bishop. Now listen to Mark Thiessen, who's a good guy and a former speechwriter for George W. Bush. Listen to his reaction as a Catholic.
So I'm glad the Pope wrote a letter, but the one word that was missing in that letter was accountability. We don't need words, we need actions right now in the Catholic Church. He said that, he quoted Pope Benedict saying how much filth there is in the church and talked about those who kept quiet or silenced the victims. One of those people who silenced the victims was your guest, Bishop Zubik. He was, from 1987 to 91, the personal secretary to Bishop Bellavacqua. He was then the director of clergy personnel from 91 to 96 for Archbishop Wuerl when he was the Bishop of Pittsburgh, when all these confidentiality agreements were being signed, when all these predator priests were being moved around. He was at the epicenter of this crisis. He pointed that cross on his lapel. You know what Christ did on that cross? He sacrificed himself. I'd like to see one of the 100 bishops in this country sacrifice themselves, saying, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, and I say to my other fellow bishops, step down and let new leaders take over.
Good for you, Mark, because that's the voice. That's the voice of the God who hears those cries. And not, you know, these guys, they don't want to give up their houses. They don't want to give up their titles. They don't want to give up the wealth. They're princes of the church, and they don't want to give up their princehood. But the thing is, if we are, this culture this is a moment of opportunity. It is a moment of opportunity when one way passes and a new way comes. I know it looks like a moment of crisis, but the crisis is all an opportunity. Every one of us has a piece of the culture in his hand. Every one of us has a chance to act like a man, to reinvent what a man is, to act like a woman, to reinvent what a woman is. Every one of us has that possibility. And when these large structures let us down, as the Catholic Church has, and as some of these huge social media corporations are trying to, it is up to each one of us to start to reinvent the world. Each one of us is given a soul of his own to reinvent the world with, and we have to start to do it. It really is, it's a big deal, even though each one of us is a small thing. Each one of us doing it is an enormous deal. All right, we got to get the new Lefties Dictionary. Today it's G, isn't it? What is G for? Let's play it. G is for gun. A gun is an evil, deadly creature that at any moment may leap into the hand of an innocent madman and kill everyone around him. Many innocent madmen have suffered at the hands of guns. There they were, standing in a crowd, or a military facility, or a gay bar, minding their own business and shouting Allahu Akbar, when suddenly a gun leapt into their hands and opened fire, thus ruining the innocent madman's life. Many a person has become a criminal simply because he was standing on a dark street demanding a fellow citizen hand over his wallet when some opportunistic gun jumped into his hand and mayhem ensued. This wouldn't happen if guns were banned. If guns were banned, the criminal would say to himself, I was going to rob that person at gunpoint, but guns have been banned, so I will simply demand that he give me his money, and if he refuses, well, all the worse for me. Women have been particularly victimized by guns. It's easy to see why. Say some 5'2", 200-pound woman is dragged into a dark alley by a muscle-bound 6'4" male who wishes to engage in what to him would be a meaningful relationship. If the woman has a gun, she might blow this guy to hell and gone, and thus miss out on an amazing interpersonal experience. So as you can see, guns are especially bad for women. Most importantly, guns are very dangerous to leftists. You see, leftists believe that your property and your conscience should belong to the state. They back up those beliefs with laws that are enforced by people with guns. If you refuse to hand your property and conscience over to the state, these people with guns will come to your house and arrest you. If, on the other hand, you also have a gun, an ugly situation may ensue. This is not just theoretical. It is based on a true story that happened in 1776. So, be warned. Guns are unhealthy for leftists because guns protect our property and our conscience, and they keep us free. And we wouldn't want that. G is for gun. I'm Andrew Klavan with the Lefties Dictionary. I love this guy. All right, come on over to the Daily Wire. We got to say goodbye to Facebook and to YouTube. You can listen on YouTube. You can listen at thedailywire.com. But if you come on over to thedailywire.com, you can and subscribe. You can watch the whole thing there and be in tomorrow's mailbag where it's uncomfortable, but you get to ask questions and I change your life. All right, we got Joy Villa coming up.